So far, we've been creating very simple navigation UIs, such as a series of buttons that are pressed to then segue to other controllers, and that's fine. But this week, we're going to get into some more complex navigation systems and using things like various class files for each individual view controller. So let's get started by first talking about a navigation controller, and this is probably the most common view controller within iOS development. And I'm actually going to get started by simply deleting this view controller. So the default view controller you can select and just hit delete. And I'm also going to delete this viewcontroller.swift file. And this is actually, and I'm just going to say move to trash. This is actually like a very common process where you would, the second that you start a new Xcode project, you would delete that first view controller and that first view controller.swift file, and we would build all of it from scratch. So this whole week we're going to be building all of this from scratch. So let's go ahead and add in what's called a navigation controller. So I'm going to type in navigation, and there's navigation controller. And whenever I drag and drop that into my scene, it's going to build a series of view controllers. Now, this on the left-hand side is what we call the base navigation controller, and this is kind of like the visuals that's going to be used for our other nav controllers, for other view controllers. And right now, by default, it builds this like table view with a root view controller. This is useless for us, so let's just click this top bar and press delete on our keyboards, and now we just have the navigation controller. So again, we don't actually see this. This is basically just the top bar part of our navigation. Let's go ahead and go back up here and type in view controller. And this may be a little confusing at first until we start getting some more content in here. So with the view controller in, I'm going to then click on our initial navigation controller and just right click and drag as if I was connecting the two to our view controller. Whenever I release, there's a couple of options, but we have a new option here called root view controller, and that's at relationship segue. Whenever I do that, it now ties these two together, and if you notice, it added this top bar section. So this top bar section that was over here is now over here as well. So what we're saying now is we're going to create a hierarchy of views. Let's select this first view. You know what, I'll just leave it white for now, but let's go ahead and add another view controller. So I'm going to grab this view controller and drag and drop it in, and I'm going to add a button, and I'll just tie this button by just right click and drag to this second view controller, and I'm going to say show. Whenever I say show, notice what happened. It added a navigation bar to the top with a back button. I'm going to undo that so you can see that one more time. So this view controller is completely disconnected. I click on my button, right click and drag, and I say show, and now it's connected those two together, and so we're building a UI. Let's go ahead and change the background color of this just so that we have something to work with. I'll use something like this, and I will build it to see how it looks. And I'm going to cut right back now because I messed up and did not add in our initial view controller. If I select my first navigation controller and I just go over here and say is initial view controller, that's now the initial view controller. Let's go ahead and hit play this time, and we're in. So here's our button. Whenever I press it, it goes to our second view, and whenever I hit back, it goes back to our first view. This is a really commonly used navigation system, right, where we have a bunch of options, and as we click them, it jumps in and out. All right, let's hit stop, and let's add another one. So I'll just go up here and add another view controller, and drag and drop it into my scene. And I'll do the same thing. So I'm going to add another button, and this button will also go to the next. I'll just click and drag, show, and let's change this one's background color as well, just so it's easy to tell. All right, that's pretty great. And the last thing we can do is actually add some interface stuff here up here at the top. So let's go to our initial view controller, and if I click up here, in the attributes editor or attributes inspector, it brings up the navigation item options. So if I click that, or I can click navigation item over here, I can put in a title. So let's call it first. Let's see what prompt is. So prompt is like a little heading title. I can put in a custom back button, but there's nothing to go back to here, so it's not going to appear. But you'll see on future ones, it will appear. So I could say like backwards, and on future view controllers, it's going to say backwards. I could also just leave that. I could start adding actually like icons and things like that. So let's click on this second one. And if I'm in this second one, I can give this a title as well by simply clicking the top bar and giving that view controller a title. So let's call it second. And now it says second up here. And let's go to this third one and click on it and say third. So what we're doing is we're actually building up a navigation system, a nested hierarchical navigation system. Let's run it and see how it looks. So it says first, I hit the button. Second, and notice that first slid over and became the back button. Third, and now that became the second. So I can always back up and go back to the first. So the navigation controller is a really powerful tool, and I want you to explore all the different things that you can play with here. What happens if we change it from large title to never or to always? What happens if we check this left item supplemental box? What happens if we modify these icons? There's also navigation bar button items, so like a bar button right here that we can add to the UI navigation items. So we could add a home button on this left-hand or right-hand side over here. So there's lots of things to play with. So go ahead and explore the navigation controller.